Hi, I'm Ira Winkler, the CISO for Cye Security. And today I wanted to put a quick video together about what I call the Hyver effect. Hyver is our premier solution, and it's something that's been developed over pretty much a decade of thought and knowledge and actual implementation. And really, the real purpose behind Hyver is to allow cybersecurity and risk professionals to get a complete understanding of the cost benefit of their cybersecurity program. It's a really complicated system. I'm not going to try to fool you. It does an awful lot that a lot of people don't understand. I think there's upwards of a dozen machine learning systems embedded in the software in order to give it the effect that it needs. So I put this quick video together to try to at least summarize what I think are the critical aspects of Hiver and why it's important to organizations. So anyway, as we go through, what's the big problem that I see? And I've said this before, and I will say it to my dying breath. The biggest problem I see in cybersecurity is that CISOs get the budgets that they deserve, not the budgets that they need. And CISOs need to learn to deserve what they need. That means that they have to have a thorough understanding of business principles and, more important, the resources to be able to calculate financial cost benefit, financial return on investment very specifically so that they can communicate the cost benefit and the return on investment to management with a very accurate number, which is essentially what Hyver allows for. When I talk to people and talk about how we address risk in cybersecurity, I put this quick slide together. Apparently, vulnerabilities is cut off on the screen, but just understand that below the red line are your vulnerabilities. And hopefully my cursor will come across. But what this graph represents is before you have any countermeasures in place, where countermeasures and the cost is at zero, your vulnerabilities are at their maximum, and everything below the red line essentially represents your potential loss. As you start to implement your countermeasures, what happens is your vulnerability should go down if you're implementing the right countermeasures. At some point, you assume that if you keep going, your vulnerabilities will get to almost zero. It's never going to get to zero because you're never going to have a perfect system, no matter how much money you spend. But at some point, you've got to realize that the cost of your countermeasures can exceed the loss related to the vulnerabilities. So when people ask me, okay, so where should I have my cybersecurity budget? Everybody assumes, okay, well, I clearly don't want to go all the way down to the right side of it. And they're like, oh, maybe I should be at this intersection. I'm like, no, because at that point, you're going to spend exactly the amount of security of the money that of your potential loss. And that would be a waste. Why go ahead and invest in security to come up with a net neutral effect? So what I tell people is they want to come up with what I call a risk optimization point, where you're determining what is the amount of loss you're willing to accept with a legitimate return on investment. So in other words, we have a point of potential loss that's approximately here. I'm just representing this visually. I don't know what that number would be for you. And your security program, the cost of your countermeasures should be significantly below the potential loss because, again, you're a risk reduction effort. You're not going to go ahead and have a perfect security program. You have to accept that there will be loss in business no matter what you do. So this is the risk optimization point. Now, going on to the next slide, one of the problems that we see is that when we're looking at how our cybersecurity programs currently budgeted, frankly, there's a problem. There's a complete disconnect. As I said, the ideal way is, again, determine what potential loss you should have. But the reality is you are given an arbitrary budget, which frequently is determined by the amount of your budget from the previous year. Maybe you'll get a little bit more, maybe you'll get a little bit less. And you give an arbitrary budget. That arbitrary budget says, here's your maximum possible countermeasures. And then it's the job of a CISO, a cybersecurity professional or risk manager, to say, okay, that's my maximum possible countermeasures. And theoretically, here's my arbitrary risk reduction. And unfortunately, I could tell you, most people don't even know what is that risk reduction. They don't put a number. They just know that they are given a amount of budget, and that's the countermeasures they put in place. And that's where they are. Now, what does that mean from a business perspective? What is the hard return on investment? You don't know what that hard return on investment is, but that's budget-driven implementation of countermeasures. And unfortunately, too many people start looking at this and saying, hey, well, gee, what percentage of the IT budget is? I don't even know how that's relevant. You don't care about, well, gee, what percentage of my IT budget is, like that somehow reduces risk. It doesn't, because you could misspend the money, you could properly spend the money, but you don't know what the reduction of risk is in return. Next, there's what I call a return on investment driven budget. And in this case, what you are proactively doing is defining your level of acceptable risk. And based upon your defined level of acceptable risk, you then go ahead and calculate, what is this budget that I need to get me to that level of reduced risk? And so you go ahead, you do that, and that's the optimized budget, where you go ahead, figure out what is the acceptable risk, how do you get to the required countermeasures, optimum budget. Here's the big problem, though. Without the proper tool set, again, this is almost going to be an arbitrary number. And I frankly don't know of any other tool out there besides Hyver that can help you get to this point. That being said, moving on to how we can go ahead and use Hiver, for example, to reduce risk in a very optimized way. With Hiver, we're going to go ahead and understand what is the cost of a countermeasure and how much risk is reduced. So we go ahead, we implement the first countermeasure that provides the highest return on investment. And there you can see we start to implement some budget, and there we have a reduced risk. We then go ahead, implement the next countermeasure. We then have more budget with more reduced risk. Then we have the next one, and the next one, and so on. And this is all an intentional determination of what is going to be the cost of your program. Now, once you have this, you start to go ahead and see if you follow this type of metric in implementing countermeasures very specific to the return on investment, you are going to go ahead and reduce your potential loss significantly more than if you just started to implement an arbitrary budget with arbitrary countermeasures. I did intentionally make sure you see that the countermeasures as defined are probably going to be slightly above where it otherwise might be. But you can also see that the benefit, the return, is a significant reduction of risk, even though you just have a slight increase in the cost of your budget. So anyway, this is what Hyver helps cybersecurity programs do, choosing countermeasures intentionally by the amount of risk reduced. And I know this is really, really hard for people because you never had a tool to do something like this before. Now, when we start looking at this, and here's a rough diagram of how hopefully you can see this on your screens, but you will see that essentially we calculate attack paths that likely attackers may use. But before we calculate the attack paths, we proactively work with you to determine what are your business assets that are at potential risk from any potential party that can do you harm. That includes even well-meaning insiders. So we go ahead and have a very accurate determination of what are the cost of your business assets. Then we work with you to determine what are your threat sources and allow you to determine, like right now, this is just a demo slide for, the standard ones like, an internet attack or on-site attackers, compromised employees, supply chain, third parties, and so on. And then we determine what are the attack paths each of these entities might use to get from where they are to the assets of value. And we figure out, using all the machine learning algorithms that we put together, what is the probability that any potential vulnerability any potential node along the attack paths are going to be exploited. And we also help figure out, hey, maybe we can go ahead and determine we have one potential, we have one potential route that if we knock out one vulnerability, that renders all the other vulnerabilities on the network a moot point, and we don't have to worry about them. But either way, we calculate the probabilities. The next part is the cost. What are the potential losses we have to look at? So anyway, here's a more detailed picture, hopefully more zoomed in, where you could see, okay, we have a 92% threat from file upload. That's an indication of something that might be critical. A 94%, misconfigured access rights could potentially be another source of loss that we go ahead and potentially address for you as a probability, so you can start to calculate which of the vulnerabilities are most likely to be exploited, and that includes ease of exploitation. And then also we have cost of the breach. Once we have the probabilities, we can then figure out what is the likelihood of the breach based upon the possible loss incurred due to different types of function. I'm not going to zoom in. Well, don't have to zoom in quickly, but in essence, in the quick scenario that we have on our demo, you can have a $1.2 to $2 million loss. There is no exact number. I want that to be clear. There's a range given all of our experience, all of the available data. Nobody can give you an exact number. And if they did, that would be bad data to go with for your calculations. But anyway, you can start to look at and quickly see, okay, here's the potential loss that could be incurred from each of the different sources of the assets that you have inside your organization. And then just drilling down a little bit more, you can start to see which are the losses that are, or which are the potential losses that can cause you the most loss. And that goes ahead and calculates that. It could show you, hey, wait a second, this one is not as potentially critical as the other one, so maybe we'll let this one exist. Here's different ways from the attackers into the resources that people could get. Let's see if I can move this around a little bit for people so you can see the bottom part of this. Anyway, you can see, so for example, this set of attackers can go ahead and compromise these different assets with a high likelihood of compromise of those assets, low likelihood of compromise of the other ones. And this is what Hyver allows people to do, a specific calculation of loss of risk that an organization has from different sources to different sources of assets. I know that's a lot to understand, but at the same time, our algorithms have been proven accurate within 7%. That's a very, very statistically significant number when we've tested this against both internal reports that have been done by outside auditors, as well as, for example, real incidents that we went ahead and recreated and recalculated losses. We were able to come within 7% of actual losses and internal calculations of loss. The data sources we use, it's not just going ahead and applying a mathematical model to random data. We use data that we get from insurance companies that talk to us about losses that industry as a whole has had. We use internal data from our clients to help tailor the information. We use industry standard losses based upon the what we see out in the real world, what incidents have there been, things to that effect. We also bring in what are the regulatory environments, what type of fines are people paying, what type of penalties, what's required, what's not required, and so on. We also calculate in geographic norms, because obviously somebody in Europe might have a different set of risk than people in the Africa continent. And then we also bring in dark web data, because dark web data has different sorts of sources of information where we can determine that there's a lot of potential hacks against, let's just say, the financial sector, and that would likely increase the potential loss within a client in the financial sector. And those are all things that we bring together and allow us to derive a return on investment calculation within 7% of actual losses. At the end of the day, like I said at the beginning, it comes down to the fact you need to deserve what you need. every countermeasure that you can bring to management or to bring to anybody who approves your budget has a calculated return on investment. This is even when you have your own budget and want to figure out the best way to make use of what you have. You can determine specifically, if you have a given budget, what are the best countermeasures to implement, which ones are unnecessary to help you save money. Frequently, our clients have saved an average of 27%, I believe the numbers are, that of the cybersecurity program they have, because many of the countermeasures they have in place have been shown to be unnecessary because other countermeasures in the attack path render that countermeasure moot. You can also present your cybersecurity program as having very specific risk reduction, that if you walk into management and say you need X amount of budget, they can go ahead and say, hey, why am I giving you this money? It's like, well, if you give me, just using an example, if you give me another $10 million, I can implement multi-factor authentication. That will reduce the organizational risk by $258.7 million. That's a clear way of deserving what you specifically need, and they would have a hard time countering that. You can also counter budget cuts where people will say, and frankly, unfortunately, right now, people are saying, we're going to have to cut your budget by 5 to 10%. And you could say, okay, I can cut my budget by 5 to 10%, but it's going to create this amount of increased risk. It's still up to your management's right to do so, but at least you're providing them with very specific information to help protect your security budget and give them a clear idea of the impact of potential budget cuts. Then, in many ways, you can define your cybersecurity program in the same way all other business processes are. So, for example, when operations wants to implement a new factory design, the new factory design has a very specific return on investment. They say it's going to cost us X amount of money to redesign the factory, but it's going to provide a Y return on investment. You can provide that same level of detail that every other profit loss center, every other business unit in your organization does. And that, again, helps you deserve what you need. So with all that being said, again, I want to thank you for listening this far, and hopefully we were able to explain how Hyver works, the strategy behind it. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or any other person who might have referred you to this video. Thanks again, and have a lovely day.